What's up guys, it's Valkia, and this video is going to cover some of the trickier heroes to hit when you're playing Pharah. For example, another Pharah, Genji, and Tracer. My number one request for my next video was to make a Pharah versus Pharah video. Now I don't normally recommend that when you're in a team fight to go and focus the Pharah because your damage could be utilized better elsewhere. When you're fighting a Pharah in the sky, you could be putting damage in on the supports on the backline, breaking down the Reinhardt shield, because if you break that shield first, most likely your team is going to win that team fight. However, there will come a time when you'll need to face the Pharah versus Pharah, and when you hit that Pharah in the middle of the air, it's one of the greatest feelings you can have in the game. While the video versus McCree, Soldiers, and Widowmakers was about creating pressure, with these three heroes, it's about precision. These heroes are far less forgiving when you miss their shots, because most likely they've disappeared from where the rocket was about to hit, or if it's a Pharah in the air, there is no walls for you to hit against. You can't get any splash damage, you have to hit them precisely. For Pharah to become precise, you need to have very good anticipation skills and prediction skills. This means that you need to understand the movements of all three of these heroes, what they're going to do, and what the most likely thing is they'll do next. The more you play versus these three heroes, the more likely you are to figure out a pattern of how they move, the way that they do their abilities, and that's what really makes you become a master of being able to fight versus these heroes. If you know when Genji's about to do his deflect or when Tracer's about to rewind, you'll be prepared for the next movement. Firstly, let's take a look at Genji. Genji is a fast-paced hero with some abilities which can be harmful to you and your team if you're not careful. The biggest ability here to be aware of is Genji's deflect. Well, Genji's deflect is a very powerful ability. With some practice, you can predict quite accurately when Genjis are about to use it. You can bait out the deflect by putting some rockets close to the Genji, but don't forget his deflect hitbox is pretty sizable. So what you'll notice is Genjis using deflect will become a lot more still because they're going to need to aim towards you. There's a 2-second window that the deflect is happening. However, if you time a rocket at the very end of the deflect, then you're going to be able to hit that Genji because most likely he's not going to be jumping around everywhere. That's kind of what separates out some of the best Genjis, because they can do the deflect while they're in the air moving around and still be quite accurate. It's always good practice to be very aware if the Genji has deflect or not. If you know his deflect is down, it's going to make your life much easier. However, if you're unsure, just always assume that the Genji has his deflect. So if Genji's used his deflect and doesn't have his ultimate, he only has one ability left, which is his dash. There are two things you can do for this. Firstly, if you have your boost ready, you can anticipate the dash towards you and boost at the very moment he uses it. Typically, Genji will use his dash in a combo, so the damage can be quite high. Secondly, if you're getting good with direct rockets, you could put a rocket in his line of dash, and this can do some major damage to the Genji, especially if he's already been hit once. Due to Genji's speed and size, getting direct rockets onto Genjis can be pretty tough, but after a while, you'll notice a pattern in the way they move. Track the Genji's movements with your eyes and keep tabs on his abilities used. After some time, you'll become familiar with Genji's movement styles, which will help you be able to predict where he'll be next, therefore making him easier to hit. One of the easier direct rockets to hit is when Genji performs a wall run. Since he can only run vertically, it's much easier to predict. So this Genji goes up onto the jump pad on Oasis, he's in the air. Now he can either use his double jump, I know he's already used his dash, but I don't know if he's used his double jump or not. I put a rocket in to where I think he's going to fall naturally, so I've kind of marked the lines of where I can, in my mind, I visualize where the Genji's going to fall down and where the rocket needs to travel if I'm going to hit him. With practice and over time, hitting direct rockets becomes almost like a second nature. If you've watched some of my other videos, you'll notice a technique I use called a boost rocket, which consists of boosting into the sky and timing a rocket as you're on the way up to hit a target. This is a great technique against Genjis to counter their ultimates, counter dashes, and also hit Genjis once they've exhausted their double jump and dash. Most times on boost rockets, you'll just be shooting straight forward. However, on this clip, you'll see I adjust my aim to compensate for the Genji falling. This technique takes practice, but you can really control the airspace once you've learnt it. Let's move on to the one that everybody's been waiting for. Let's talk about how to take out another Pharah as Pharah. A Pharah in the sky is probably one of the hardest targets to take down, other than a Mercy being in the sky with the Pharah. You have to make sure that you hit the direct rockets. Sometimes the Pharahs can fly close to buildings, so you can get some sort of splash damage, but a lot of the time, when you're fighting Pharah versus Pharah, you'll be kind of in the middle of the air. Fighting Pharahs like Genji is about recognizing patterns in movement. However, Pharah has a relatively low movement speed when you engage in a 1v1 battle. You need to have an internal timer for when you see the Pharah using boost and keep track of when it's being used and anticipate when it will be used next. You'll see during 1v1 battles a routine of Pharahs floating left to right and try to avoid being shot, along with boosting as a technique of evasion. Battles versus Pharahs also normally happen at quite some distance, so you're able to dodge incoming rockets, but also makes it harder for you to land direct rockets. If you want to become a great Pharah in a 1v1 fight, you need to take away your predictability. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to get hit. Take away that predictability and you become a much harder target to hit. So the way you take away the predictability is that you kind of, instead of going left and right, you will go left and then you'll go a little bit more left. And then what's great using the hover is if you let go of the hover, you kind of fall out of the sky pretty quickly. So you'll let go of the hover, then you'll fall down and then you'll boost straight back up and then you'll go right and then you go right again and then maybe you'll go right again. And it takes away that kind of pattern, so it makes it much harder for the enemy Pharah to kind of predict where you're going to be and where you're going to go. And if they're going to be using a typical pattern, it makes you way more in control. Here we can see a Pharah doing a semi-typical pattern, going left to right, but with a slight bit of variation. If I notice the Pharah's moving a particular direction, I'll predict my rocket in the flight path, keeping in mind if they have boost or not, since this can also be used as a rocket placement above their current location to hit them. If you notice the Pharah pattern is moving left and right, get a feeling for the motion, and because you know how fast your rockets travel, you can stagger rockets left and right, and most likely on one of the sides it's going to hit the Pharah. There's also a semi-delay between changing direction left and right, just due to how the hover pack works. Even for myself, shooting down a Pharah from the sky is pretty difficult. I've had to spend endless hours practicing to find techniques which give you more control than the other Pharah, and one of the best as before is the boost rocket. Since Pharahs move pretty slowly, the speed generated from the boost rocket gives you a slight more control in being able to hit the Pharah once you practice enough. Normally you have to be at a closer distance to the Pharah for the boost rocket to become effective. If it's too far away, it'll be too easy for the Pharah to dodge it. Another example of using your own movement speed to line up rockets is concussive blast. I find sometimes that hitting Pharahs can be easier once you build up a bit of momentum. Sometimes I visualize just prior to shooting where the Pharah will end up. In summary to Pharah, you're keeping a hawkeye on the Pharah for any similar patterns of movement and combining techniques to keep yourself in control. Of course, there is the baseline skill of rocket placement, but once you get more confident with your own movement and all the skills discussed, you'll improve on Pharah versus Pharah. The last thing is if you're fighting a Pharah which has a mercy attached, that becomes very difficult. You need to make sure you get about 2 rockets under a second onto that Pharah to be able to take down a Pharah being constantly healed by the mercy. Ideally, unless you have your own mercy, you want to get yourself out of that situation. Let's move on to the final hero of the video, which is Tracer. Tracer is slightly different than Genji and Pharah, since you have to constantly keep taking mental notes about the path line she has taken and how many blinks she's used and if she's used her recall or not. Tracer is a very annoying hero due to her speed and unpredictability, but keep making mental notes of the route Tracer has taken for when she recalls. If you practice learning where Tracers were 3 seconds ago, you have a split second to put a rocket onto the rewind location, since Tracers have a slight lack of movement after recall. What I like to do when I'm facing a Tracer is force the recall. If you can force the recall, that means the Tracer isn't going to be diving your backlines and she's way more vulnerable to your rockets. It's recommended to fight Tracer at a medium range. If you're too close, then she can probably one-clip and take you out. And if you're too far away, it's going to be far too easy for her to dodge the rockets. What you really need to do is capitalize once she's used all her abilities. Just standard rocket prediction and follow her movements where you think she's most likely to go. Is she injured? Is she going to be heading for a health pack? Put rockets where you think she's about to go to. The good thing about Pharah versus Tracer is that it makes you become much better at predictions in general. Since she's so fast, you get a heightened awareness of what she could do next. While Pharah isn't the best hero to deal with Tracers, it's not impossible, but very difficult. Sometimes the best way to really understand the hero is to actually play them, so you can understand their limitations and know when they are most vulnerable. Tracer, like the other heroes, will also work off patterns, so identify that kind of pattern. It's probably down to the person who's playing Tracer through that game, but see if they are doing something in particular, a route they're taking, and that way you're going to be able to predict where to put your rockets much more easily. Since Tracer runs along the floor, you can also deal some splash damage, so if your rocket isn't completely perfect, you're still going to be doing little bits of damage if it's in the right area. So this covers tips and tricks on the way that I play versus these 3 heroes. They're all pretty difficult to fight against, but with practice you'll get better. I would also never recommend you ult any of them, since they're too easy to miss unless they're in a graviton, but even then you need to be hyper aware of Genji's deflect. I said earlier in a little tip box, but the Pharah Mercy Brawl is really helpful for airshot practice on other Pharahs. I'll play the Brawl now and again just to keep my accuracy up. Once you get good at rocket placements, you open Pharah to a whole world of fun. Not only do air shots look impressive, but you become more of an asset to your team if you can reliably hit the shots. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and don't forget to check out some of my other videos, including how to take down hit scans, concussive blasts that you might not know, and my Grandmaster guide to playing Pharah, which can all be found on my channel. Make sure to drop a thumbs up and subscribe if you've enjoyed the content.